I've always been fond of science fiction. One of my favorite films that I made was called The Day the Earth Stood Still years ago. And so when the opportunity came along, Universal sent me the book on Andromeda strain and said if I liked it, they'd buy it for me. And I read it and loved it, of course, and they bought it for me, and the rest is history. We made the book.
Vandal Decker to Cable 1, what's happened?
We see bodies, lots of them.
Jeez. There's a fire, sir.
Fast. These people were cut down in mid-stride.
First step is to confirm that an organism is present.
Whatever killed them at Piedmont is still there and still as potent as ever.
Isolate and identify.
We don't know what it is.
It doesn't come from here.
I suspect they were looking for the ultimate biological weapon.
Till now, wildfire's been like a game.
Wildfire was built for germ warfare.
I never believed this could really happen.
It's growing.
It shouldn't even be alive.
It functions like an atomic reactor.
The gases are decomposing. It's Andromeda.
Contamination.
A seal has broken in autopsy.
There are now 25 seconds to self-destruct.
Andromeda will spread everywhere. They'll never be rid of it.
16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Self-destruct has been canceled.
How much of this is fact, and how much of it is fiction?
I've always considered Andromeda strain more science fact than fiction, really, I think. And that's one of the things that intrigued me about it.
A laboratory like this actually exists, although it's probably different from what I've described, which makes it all both science fact and science fiction.
I very seldom want the screenplay done by the original author, because so many times you have to make big changes, major changes in screenplay, and the original author is very bound into his own concepts and what he wrote. So I think it's always much better to get another screenwriter to do the screenplay rather than the original author.
It was a big book, and Bob Wise read it and said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Yes. I think it'll be, we can do a good job." He wanted to make it as factual as possible, but of course it wasn't. It was highly imaginative, although it was ahead of the curve scientifically, as all Crichton stuff has been since then.
Now, as a writer, the essential problem for me was not scientific. The story is a howdunit, a variation of a whodunit.
He's a marvelous man, you know. He's just so bright, so brilliant, and so big. You know, he's about 6'9". He's a terribly tall man. We got along fine. When we finally got the picture done and he saw it, I think he was very pleased with it, as far as I know.
Bob said, when we first met, he said, "We're doing this movie and no one's in it." And I thought, "What do you mean no one's in it?" I didn't know what he was thinking of. And then he said, he started laughing when he saw my face, and he said, "That means there aren't any stars." But I certainly knew of Arthur Hill because I'd seen Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf on Broadway, and I certainly knew of Kate Reed. And David Wayne as well. The only one I didn't know was Jimmy Olsen.
The reason I went with the casting the way I did, which are not big names at all, is I felt it would be much more believable if we had not stars like Gregory Peck and others handling those arms through the thing, you know, but had some good actors, but who were not that well known. It would be much more believable, and I think it turned out to be that. I wanted to make it as much of a documentary flavor as I could, to make this is real, this is reality.
I never went in much for science fiction.
Nor do I.
I had an interesting experience in terms of the woman in the film. In the original book, all the scientists were men. Nelson Gidding, the screenwriter, came in to see me one day while I was doing the screenplay, and he said, "What would you think of making this character into a woman?"
At that time, there weren't so many women scientists. There were, you know, there were some great ones, but it wasn't accepted. And I came to him and I said, one of the characters should be a woman doctor.
I said, "Get out of here. I can see it's Raquel Welch of the submarine again," or something like that. He said, No, hear me out." And he described the kind of woman scientist that he saw. I was still not convinced myself, so I called 2 or 3 scientists that I knew here in town who had read the book and knew the character. And I said, "What would you think of making this character a woman. They said that would be fine with us. Said we have many fine women scientists, and that would not violate the film at all.
And he said, oh, I'd try it. He's a wonderful director in that way. If you have an idea and feel strong about it, he'll say, well, try it anyhow. A phrase of his is, the cheapest thing about this movie is the paper that you write, you use. So go ahead and try it anyhow.
So that's when I went back and eventually got the marvelous actress Kate Reed to do the role. And she turned out to be the most interesting character of all. She had kind of sarcastic wit and a sense of humor and fun. She was very interesting.
Something wrong?
I never liked red lights. Reminds me of my years in a bordello.
Kate was an incredible actress. And she also had this kind of really interesting quality. And she had a sort of tough-minded maternalism or something like that, in that area. And she was very believable.
It's a finger and palm print analyzer that...
It's a composite of 10,000 dermatographic lines.
How'd you know that? Oh, that one.
I have a long criminal record.
I think that the only appearance I make in a movie is in this film. It's in the scene where they interrupt Hall's surgery.
There's just been a call from a Dr. Robertson at the White House.
It was very interesting. I asked Bob if I could be in the movie, if I could appear in it. And of course, I would have to be sitting down since I'm so tall. You suddenly realize that he is the editor of Citizen Kane because he said to me, well, let me see where I can put you where you won't possibly be cut out. And he set me in a shot in a scene that he knew he absolutely had to have, and that no matter what, it would stay in the film. And there I am with my beard.
Now, it's all arranged. You're expected in the surgeon's room in 30 seconds.
I did a lot of research and read an awful lot of science stuff and science fiction stuff. But there's a bibliography in the back of the Andromeda string, and it's a fascinating bibliography, and I checked all those books, and every one of them was fictional. Michael Crichton had made them up. It was a fictional bibliography. I've learned that trick from him, and I've used it ever since. And the facts that I need that don't exist, I make up.
We have a magnetic K indices here. Give us a code 3 when you get it.
And in the Andromeda strain, you'll see a lot of tech-tuk, you know, MiG-2 and TAC-2, and it sounds very authentic, and I've been congratulated on it. It's all fictional. I made it up.
Affirmative. N indicator in MP4.
One of our RFs shows 6 points over nominal and pressure 3.
Please maintain random fringe drift within 10% of initial value.
Scenic strip is a screenplay with a little difference, with a style, and that's the style of this. In those days, Bob Wise liked that. It's written, it's done in cinematic terms, and it's quite different and much more exciting.
We decided to shoot it with the cinemascope, and then we used something called a diopter. We put it in the lens that would allow you to have that kind of great depth of field. I just felt that was the way to do it if you could. I always hate the way we lose depth of focus, and particularly the cinemascope, some of those things. So when I had a chance to put the diopter in the lens and do that and get great depth of field, I just think it makes it much more real and believable. I built suspense by first seeing the people on the ground and all, but not realizing they were dead or what happened to them. Going back to the base and then eventually coming back and going down and finding that these are all dead from some kind of virus or whatever.
Coronary?
I doubt it.
They were all real people. I don't think we had any animals down there. They were all real people. We just found local people there that could do these things for us. It was not difficult at all. Dead on the ground, some hanging themselves, whatever. Just we found local people that would fill these roles for us. I don't know where I got the idea to do the split screen like that. It's just, I felt the need at that time to say these things are going on simultaneously. And that's the way I chose to do it, by shooting it that way, as if this was happening while this was happening, and this was happening, and this was happening. Stu Gilmore was my editor, so I got a lot of help from Stu as the editor as to how these things could work, and I think finally it all came together and worked very well. Not terribly complicated to compose it that way, you know, you just have to plan it all, know exactly what you want to do. If you have a sketch artist, you sketch things out and see just how it'll go, and then shoot it. So I had a lot of storyboards for the movie. I had a man that used to work with me called Zubrano, Maury Zubrano. He did the sketches for me. That's the way I usually work. I have storyboards, as we call them, sketches, story sketches. I worked that way for years.
It starts here.
We had the problems of the matter of the different levels. We had the tunnels, go around. And we couldn't obviously afford to build 4 of those at different levels, or 5, whatever it was. So when we finished shooting everything we had on the one level, whatever color it was, we went off to shoot some scenes in the labs or whatever, so they could repaint the tunnel to the next color. So we only had 1 tunnel, but we used it for all 4 or 5 levels that we had by just repainting.
The sets required to do justice to the novel presented a fantastic challenge. Still, I've always believed in giving full rein to an author's imagination. We enlisted the services of designer Boris Levin.
Boris was wonderfully gifted and a very good one. You've probably seen a lot of his work. I worked with him before he came onto the picture. And this is the first and only experience I've had like that. And I worked with him, and I had an idea, and I said, can I do this? And he would help it. For instance, in the part where they're looking at the plan of the facility, we worked that out together, and it was a wonderful experience.
There's a scene in the Andromeda Strain where they're analyzing the entire core facility, this kind of stacked, cylindrically shaped building.
It can be studied on this electronic diagram.
That was a very interesting application of the slit scan process, where we made a projector, a 35 millimeter movie projector, with floor plans of the building on each frame of film. And then we had a piece of white cardboard. We'd project these floor plans on it. And then while the camera's looking at it from an oblique angle with the colored gel, move it slightly up 1 floor. So it created a kind of a transparent exposure of all these floors. And then you'd change the next floor plan and then go up the next floor and change the next floor plan and go up the next floor. And we created this whole building 3-dimensionally so you could rotate it and look through it transparently. This was in the time, we didn't have any computer graphics.
We're on level 1 of a 5-story cylindrical underground structure surrounded by solid rock.
It was my first experience seeing something made out of a book I'd written. I was interested in everything, but I realized at that point how much of the story I actually had never visualized. People would say, well, is this what you thought the laboratory would look like? And I never really worked it out. It was funny. I liked the look of the picture. Bob had to work really hard at that time to do live closed-circuit TV and stuff. It was extremely difficult. It's funny now, in retrospect, to think about how much time and how much reshooting they had to do. Dick Klein, would come in and say, I'm sorry, Bob, the faces are purple. And, they'd go back and do it again. It was really a new thing. And certainly the feeling that the movie had, that sort of cold quality of the sets and that sort of unadorned feeling was new.
We start decontamination and immunization procedures now.
The gap between what a man can imagine and what people are actually doing is closing very rapidly. For example, NASA put their lunar astronauts through a decontamination procedure. Our decontamination process is much more elaborate.
That's out of the news. If you remember, at the time, there was a great deal of concern that when the man came back from the moon, they would be contaminated with something. So when they got out of the capsule and they went right into a facility, that facility they went to was airtight with airlocks and all that, and they were scared to death. Since then, of course, you see the guys waving and getting out. But in those days, they were afraid, my God, nobody'd been in outer space.
All right, stand by, everybody. Check rehearsal, everything but the spray. We wound up with 3 scientists as technical advisors, plus $4 million worth of borrowed and rented equipment. Some of it so advanced that is not commercially available. And some equipment that wasn't available at all, we built.
The Andromeda Strain was very informative to me as well, because I was on the set with the crew and they were using these remote manipulators from an atomic facility. I think they were made by a company called Atomics International. And I was very impressed that you could just grab this thing and then this remote manipulator would just do whatever your hand did in 3-dimensional space. You could grab things and move them around. And I later used that in Close Encounters to do the cloud sequence, where we built a big water tank, filled it with water, and had a little pipette of white paint being injected into the tank. And I could be outside the tank behind the camera, pushing a button and then drawing in painting in three-dimensional space into this water, creating artificial clouds, which would expand out of nowhere, and it looked wonderfully realistic. And that wouldn't have ever emerged in Close Encounters if I hadn't had this experience on the Andromeda strain.
Whatever killed them at Piedmont is still there and still as potent as ever.
We had this problem that we had to have this monkey die, and yet we couldn't do it. Of course, we couldn't kill any animals, so one of my assistants had a connection with the USC, University of Southern California, and they came up with the following idea. In the glass enclosure that they were in, we put what we call an apple box that high, and put a candle on it. And then we had the monkey up there ready, and when we put the carbon monoxide in there up to where the candle went out, then we knew we were filled there. Then we brought the monkey in, dropped him in, and he did all the contortions of somebody dying, which he was. And then before the final thing, we pulled him out, and there was a vet there with the oxygen, flashed it with oxygen, and he came out fine, no problem. Didn't lose a monkey. This was done under supervision. The SPCA was Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. There was a representative there, and then this doctor, as I said, it flashed him with oxygen when he came out, and so it was all fine.
Looks alive.
Yeah.
It's bigger than 2 microns.
To put that on a viewing screen was very difficult for us. Here we are setting up to shoot the scene, working in cramped quarters. The stand-ins leave, and their places are taken by Arthur Hill, playing Dr. Jeremy Stone, and Kate Reed, playing Dr. Ruth Levitt. They will study enlargements of several hundred to several thousand magnifications.
Doug Trumbull is just brilliant in his field of special effects and all. I don't think there's been anybody quite like him. And so he did a marvelous job for us on Andromeda strain and creating the strain.
Just prior to the Andromeda strain, I had started a small company, and I was doing some visual effects using some of the techniques I learned making 2001. So I was present in Hollywood, visible to certain people, and when Robert Wise was beginning the production of the Andromeda strain, I was approached about doing the special effects. And I found it to be a really intriguing little project. I very much liked the book and Michael Crichton's work.
It was very entertaining to go see Doug's studio at that time. He had everything in this place. Everything was a special effect, including he had this mother and daughter who looked to be identical twins, blondes, California blondes, sort of at the door, and it began with that, and went on. And he had this huge space. It was a sort of playground for him. It was great. I thought he had the best life that anyone could have. He was trying to do silent running at that time. He eventually did.
The Andromeda strain required something that was completely different from anything I'd done before that I was kind of fascinated with, which was microphotography and electron microphotography and looking at matter almost down at the subatomic level. And so I got this job to do the visual effects for the Andromeda strain. I was very young and very naive at the time when I did it, and I way underbid the job. I had no clue how much these things were supposed to cost, and so I almost went bankrupt in doing it. And I partnered with a friend named Jamie Short, who was at that time a really brilliant young computer engineer who could actually write code and deal with some of these very, very first pre-PC computers. And we developed some really pretty interesting little gadgets. One of them was computer controlling motion control for microphotography, but also a very high resolution video monitor and a very high resolution video camera and a magic image processor box so that we could aim this camera at any subject, bring it into this very high resolution 2,000 line resolution video system in black and white, but we could do 3 color filters, yellow, cyan, magenta, and make color. And we created kind of the prototype electronic optical printer so that we could take these images we were shooting in microscopes or of miniatures, process them through this electronic device change the colors, posterize it, create all kinds of static and electrical interference, and kind of electronify the image so that it looked like it was coming from some weird electron microscope or some real-time high-res video thing, but still be film quality.
Switch to manual, Ruth. The interior is too irregular to probe an automatic.
We started out with a very fine kind of copper mesh as the thing that they would actually have trapped, like a little filter with a little spots of green flecks they were just green paint.
You know something? They do look like spatters of paint.
But it was a phosphorescing paint. We had a very powerful ultraviolet light that could make this green paint actually light up and kind of pulsate a little bit. And then we started building scaled up versions of zooming in farther and zooming in farther and zooming in farther to where we were building little sections of that mesh out of huge pieces of number 12 copper wire, weaving the copper wire into what looked like a much magnified version of that mesh with our little miniature green blobs in there and little pouches and things that we could make blow up with little air pressure, or we could actually dab paint between frames and make it grow to, make the organism seem to be alive. And all that stuff was shot under the microscope. I think Robert Wise pretty much left it up to us to come up with something that would be new or different or kind of look like that, but we tried many different things before we came up with something that he liked a lot, or that he accepted. But when we got into even further magnifications of the growth mechanism was when we got into some really interesting kinds of photography. This was a very exotic first move into computer-controlled photographic processes that were just emerging at the time that Jamie Short and I had been developing.
We have an Andromeda cell in the EM. Okay, Charlie, let's put it on the screen.
In the Andromeda strain, we were dealing with a replicating tetrahedron, which is basically like 4 hexagons stacked together. And I had this idea that the way that this organism replicated was like a little toy that we used to call click-clack blocks. Click-clack blocks were little square pieces of wood stacked with little bands around them, and if you flipped it one way, it would unfold, and if you flipped it the other way, it would unfold, and it seemed to have no inside and no outside. And so we made these little hexagons so that they could start almost like a little truncated pyramid, and that these sides would fold out and then form 2 more pyramids, and those 2 more pyramids would form 2 more pyramids, and this thing would exponentially grow. And so we did this all under computer control. We had a little plexiglass hexagon that we could light with a strobe light on a little rod, and the rod was connected to a stepper motor, and the stepper motor was mounted on this XYZ movement device that could flip it to all the different positions, fire the strobe light, reposition it, fire the strobe light, and animate the whole thing under computer control. Then we'd take that photography, put it through this electronic optical printer, make all kinds of buzzing colorations and static and grain to it, and make it look like it was an electronic image.
It's Andromeda.
Emergency procedures are in effect.
Andromeda will spread everywhere. They'll never be rid of it. What about the central core?
This set is the nerve center of the secret 5-story underground laboratory, which of course we built above ground on one of the largest stages in Hollywood. To allow for a height of 67 feet, we had to break the concrete stage floor and dig well below it. It took 6 months to build, the entire inner core being stainless steel. This core was equipped with 2 functioning laser beam guns to guard against improper entry or exit. At a crucial point in the story, these guns come into play. We all had to be extremely careful not to look directly into the beam because of the danger of serious eye damage.
Matte paintings in any movie are obviously to add to a scene something which you couldn't physically build. And that's always been true for exteriors or interiors, and it's used in the Andromeda strain in the core interior to make a few stories look like many more stories.
But you do many times when you have something that you don't have the complete thing, you do the central part of it and whatnot, and then they'll have a painting to carry the rest of it. Al Whitlock was a very special matte painter at painting matte paintings to fill out and flesh out a scene.
I was a young guy at the time, and Al Whitlock was like a god. He would personally go in there and paint out black on a piece of glass in front of the camera to block out the part of the shot that he was then going to subsequently paint and add to the scene. I learned a huge amount from Al Whitlock about perspective and lighting and painting, and he was just amazing.
When I did the Hindenburg, I went to him and said, can we believably show a dirigible like the Hindenburg outside of a hangar in Frankfurt and take her up in the air and fly her across the ocean through all kinds of circumstances and bring her down past New York and into Lakehurst where she exploded on landing. And he said, yeah, I think we could do that. So I consulted with him before I took the assignment to do that.
We now know beyond a doubt that other forms of life exist in the universe.
Thanks to Scoop.
Yes. However, with this new knowledge, there's no guarantee that another so-called biological crisis won't occur again.
I thought it was very important to make this point, that there's a big problem that might happen out there, and we should be aware of it and be ready to tackle it.
What do we do about that?
Precisely, Senator.
I think there's very much of a relevance to it. I think it's much more science fact than fiction. And I dwelt on that and tried to emphasize that as much as I could when I made the film.
What do we do?
I didn't want a standard musical score, but I felt I needed something to go with it, you know. So I talked to Gil to see if he couldn't give me a musical score in another fashion than just for the regular orchestra. And he did. He came up with this whole process of making the score and making it work, but not making it a music score. And I thought he did a wonderful job on it, just excellent.
I think of books and movies as very different. I'm particularly impressed, I was then, because it was the first movie I'd ever been on. I thought, you've got an army of people here. And, you know, because I'd just come out of medicine, I was particularly interested that they just sort of did what he asked.
Okay, now, stand clear when they let that gas go. Get out of there. Right away.
Because I thought, how can you make people do things unless they're sick and afraid? And this is what a doctor's way of proceeding is. The physical nature of that work, which is so strikingly different from writing, you know, it's all abstract, was tremendously exciting for me. But I realized fairly soon after that because it's a construction job, you know, and because it involves hundreds of people and because it has so many elements that have to come together, that very often it doesn't work out well. And I feel that I've been very lucky in the number of them that have turned out well for me. I just feel enormously pleased when that happens.
I think Andromeda Strain was a very important movie. It was a major first for Michael Crichton. It was a hugely successful book. I thought it was a very interesting movie for Robert Wise. It was a great opportunity for me because it was a springboard into silent running. It was an important movie in a lot of ways, and I think it was a very interesting film, filled with a lot of stuff that you've never seen before or have never seen since.
Wildfire was built for germ warfare. Wildfire and Scoop. And you knew, Stone.
It's an excellent screenplay. Don't be afraid to say it. It was an excellent novel, and it had a wonderful director. So why shouldn't it be a well-crafted screenplay? And it's one of his best films.
I've done every genre there is and approach each genre in the cinematic style it deserves. That's what I think I did with Andromeda Strain, you know? And I think it paid off.
Everybody's dead!
What happened? They brought it on themselves.
Who? The people in Piedmont?
I thought it was a very good film, and I thought we did just what was indicated in Michael's book. I was very pleased with the results of it. It turned out well.
We can feel confident your so-called biological crisis is over.
As far as Andromeda is concerned, yes. However, with this new knowledge, there's no guarantee that another so-called biological crisis won't occur again.
Thank you.